Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you all had a good weekend. Today we're going to get started on section 26. We've now moved into a new chapter called the Exodus. And if you recall, this takes place about 400 years after where we left off on Thursday and Friday. And the trailer video at the beginning of the Exodus, if you have some time later on today, or at the end of this lesson, put your headphones in, feel free to watch it. If not, we will watch it tomorrow before class, or at the beginning of class, I should say. And we'll see that and see what we have coming ahead of us in this chapter. There's a lot of stuff in this chapter. It's a great, detailed, packed chapter. So we're going to start here with section 26, with the birth and adoption of Moses, and then Moses' flight to Midian. So this first section here that we have with chapter 1 just kind of goes through all of the descendants of Israel and their names, which we know already. And then it goes on in verse 6 to talk about how Joseph and his brothers and that whole generation had died. And then the Israelites continue to be very fruitful and prolific, meaning that they just keep multiplying. If you look back in verse 5, it says that at the time that they moved to Egypt, the number of Jacob's descendants is 70. But yet, as years go on, and again, we're talking 400 years. So as 400 years go on, they continue to multiply, and they become incredibly numerous. So numerous that the land is filled with them. So then we look here at the oppression, and we see here in verse 8 that it says that a new king who knew nothing of Joseph, rose to power in Egypt. Now, this new king, we're going to look here in the Did You Know pop-up that we're talking about here. This new king that comes to power is the Pharaoh, And the Pharaoh, as we know, is a title for the king of Egypt. And the name, as it says here, the term means great house and originally referred to the royal palace of the monarch. Now, according to Egyptian scribal convention, and this is where it gets important, the Pharaoh's name was not written before the 10th century. So every chapter that we have done before this, including the chapter with Joseph, we don't know who the Pharaoh is. And it just is the Pharaoh. Which explains, like I said, why in the Pentateuch, the pharaohs are not identified. However, at this point, we might start to see some of that. Not really, though, but we can kind of assume that the most likely candidate for Pharaoh during the Exodus is Ramses II that we see here. So we do believe that Ramses II is the Pharaoh at the time that we're talking right now. So he rises to power, and he notices how vast the number of Israelites are. So he says to his people, "See, the Israelite people have multiplied and become more numerous than we are. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them to stop their increase. Otherwise, in time of war, they too may join our enemies to fight against us and so leave the land." The Pharaoh realizes that their numbers are so big that they could eventually overpower him and overtake him. And he's very fearful of that. So he tells his people, deal with them. And what they do in verse 11 is they set up supervisors over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. They turn them into their slaves, whereas before they lived amongst them. Now they are their slaves. And they build for Pharaoh the garrison cities of Pithom and Ramses. And the more they're oppressed, though, Israelites are very, very strong. And the more that they are oppressed, actually, the more they multiply and spread. And again, the Egyptians hate the Israelites. And now the Egyptians hate them so much that they start to force them into cruel slavery, slave labor, abusive. And they make life bitter for them. However, they continue to still multiply. So, going over here to verse 15, the Pharaoh devises a plan. And the plan that he comes up with is that he tells the Hebrew midwives. Now let's just talk here about what this word midwives means. Whoops, I didn't mean to completely cross that out, but highlight that. Midwives. What midwives means is it's someone who assists in the labor of a baby. Okay, so at this time there were no hospitals, there was no labor and delivery, there were no, doctors, there were midwives, and these women would help assist in the birth of the children. The midwives were Hebrews, and the Pharaoh calls them in and says to them in verse 16, when you act as midwives for the Hebrew women, look on the birth stool, and if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, she may live. The midwives, however, feared God. That's the big thing here, that the midwives are definitely God-fearing women, and they realize that what they're doing, or what the Pharaoh wants them to do, is wrong. So they don't do it, and yet they let the boys live. But then, of course, Pharaoh gets very angry, and in verse 18, the Pharaoh calls them and says, "What have you done? Why are you allowing the boys to live?" And then in verse 19, great answer by the midwives, because they defend their actions and at the same time insult the Egyptians. They tell Pharaoh, well, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. Insult, they are robust and give birth before the midwife arrives, meaning that it's too late by the time we get there. Unlike these Egyptian women who need us, the Hebrews, they're able to have babies by themselves. Okay? Now, God then deals well with the midwives, and the people multiply and grow very numerous. But because the midwives feared God, God builds up families for them. But now Pharaoh is still angry. So Pharaoh then commands all his people to throw into the Nile every boy that is born. Let the girls live. Now, if you look on the next page, the Did You Know pop-up talks about here, and that's what I have here for you, why only kill the male children? Well, without Hebrew males, the females would be forced to marry Egyptians. And then their children would be Egyptian. And then all of that Hebrew Israelite land would have to be given to the Egyptians. And then the Pharaoh would win. Okay? So that's the whole concept there. Now, we're going to talk about the birth and adoption of Moses, but I'm going to put it on the next slide because I've put this whole section on the next slide. Okay, so moving on to chapter 2, birth and adoption of Moses. So we see here that a man and woman of the house of Levi marry. Okay, Levi, meaning one of the tribes of Levi, one of the sons of Israel. And the woman conceived and bore a son. Seeing what a fine child he was, she hid him for 3 months, because remember, if she didn't hide him, then he would have been killed. So she hides him for 3 months. And by the way, we are talking that this takes place in the year 1256 BC. That's the time frame we're talking about, just to give you an idea. But now he's getting so big that she can't hide him anymore. So what she does is she takes a papyrus basket, daubed it with bitumen and pitch, and putting the child in it, placed it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile. Now his sister, whose name, by the way, is going to be Miriam. Let's write that in. You can add that in. We'll put it in our notes too. Let's get this written in the right place, possibly. Miriam. Okay. Stations herself at a distance to find out what happened to him. So here's what happens. Mom puts Moses in a basket, sends him down the Nile River. Miriam, his sister, follows alongside of the river to see where the basket goes. Now, before we go any farther with that, let's come over here to, and I believe that this is the pop-up from the previous page, and the plot thickens. This right here, okay? So the Hebrew term for basket is the same term used in Genesis for Noah's Ark. So we can see a parallel between Moses and Noah. Both are going to escape the waters of death. Both are going to float safely in a vessel sealed with pitch, and both survive to become saviors of others. Now, we are going to see in a moment that Moses, as an infant, will be rescued. And the rescue of the infant Moses is going to anticipate the rescue of the infant Messiah. When we get to Jesus, we're going to see that when he is a baby, his death, and not just his, but all young boys' death, was ordered by a royal edict against boys 2 years old and younger. It's called the Holy Innocents. And Jesus' parents are able to take action and secure his safety in Egypt, just as Moses' safety is secured by the Pharaoh, actually Pharaoh's daughter, in Egypt. So looking at verse 5, Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe at the Nile, while her attendant walked along the bank of the Nile. Noticing the basket among the reeds, she sent her handmaid to fetch it. On opening it, she looked, and there was a baby boy crying. She was moved with pity for him and said, "It is one of the Hebrews' children." Now, stop right there. How does she know that it's a Hebrew's child? There are a couple reasons. First of all, the basket that he would have had would have been very clearly a part of the Hebrew tradition. The other reason is that if they looked at Moses, he would have been circumcised because he would have been a Hebrew child. So clearly they know that it is one of the Hebrews' children. So now Miriam, who had followed alongside, approaches Pharaoh's daughter and says, "Shall I go and summon a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" Because Moses would have had to have been fed, and Pharaoh's daughter would not have been able to take care of that. So Pharaoh's daughter says, "Yes, go." So now Miriam goes back to her own mother, Moses' own mother, and Pharaoh's daughter says to her, "Take the child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman, his mother, takes the child and nurses him. So when the child grew up, at the time that he can be weaned, probably around 3, I guess, she brings him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she names him Moses, for she said, "I drew him out of the water." Now, this box here, how did Moses get his name? I have placed up here for us to look at. So after his own mother, or Hebrew mother, nursed him, the boy is brought to Pharaoh's daughter, like we said. The Egyptian princess named him Moses, which means born or begotten in Egyptian. It is also a combination of 2 Egyptian royal names, Thutmose and Ramses, which are possibly the 2 last pharaohs. Isn't it interesting that Moses is technically named after pharaohs that he is going to wind up overthrowing? In Hebrew, Moses' name is going to be translated as Moshe, which means brought up out of the water. And that right here is what she says, "I have brought him up out of the water, therefore I shall name him Moses." So this next section of Moses' flight to Midian, I've also put on the next slide so that we can complete it fully together. Okay, so let's pick up at verse 11. So now, Moses has grown up at this point. He's much, much older. One thing that's important to know is that Moses is aware that he is a Hebrew. All right, so he knows that, but he knows that he's living the life of an Egyptian, but knows that he's been adopted, and that he was Hebrew. So on one occasion, after Moses had grown up, when he had gone out to his kinsmen and witnessed their forced labor, he sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, one of his own kinsmen. And it completely resonates within him that this man has done harm to one of his own. So looking about and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, when it says here that he struck down the Egyptian, that means he killed him. And that killing him foreshadows his character and mission as a liberator, which is what he's going to do. Because what is he doing? He's standing up to defend the weak and the oppressed. So verse 13, the next day he went out again, and now 2 Hebrews were fighting. And so he says to them, "Why are you striking your companion?" And he replied, "Who has appointed you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" All of a sudden now he realizes that the fact that he killed the Egyptian is known, and that's not good. He realizes that the Pharaoh is going to really be very angry with him and want to kill him for this. So we see that Moses became afraid and thought the affair must certainly be known. And when Pharaoh heard of the affair, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the Pharaoh and went to the land of Midian. There he sat down by a well. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs of water to their father's flock. But the shepherds came and drove them away. So Moses rose up in their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, so make sure you know his name, he said to them, "How is it you have returned so soon today?" So they answer, "An Egyptian delivered us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "Where is he?" he asked his daughters. "Why did you leave the man there? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with him, and the man gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She conceived and bore a son who he named Gershom, for he said, "I am a stranger residing in a foreign land." So we see that because Moses was fulfilling what his job is going to be, he winds up fleeing to Midian. He marries Zipporah. They have Gershom. And it's going to be in Midian where Moses is going to hear from God through the burning bush. And we'll pick up with that tomorrow. But let's get some notes down on this section. Okay, so here we have the birth and adoption of Moses. We have the oppression of the Israelites, that the Israelite nation grows for 430 years, and that Ramses has enslaved them, and that he is afraid of their numbers. You may want to add that we believe that this is Ramses II. Okay. He orders all male babies drowned, but even before he had done that, he ordered the midwives to kill the male babies. That didn't look good. Let's fix that. To kill male babies. Okay. We see the birth of Moses in the Nile River and that he's found by Ramses' daughter. Make sure that you know his sister Miriam, like we were talking about before. Follows him down the Nile. And therefore then his mother, his own mother, nurses him. Make sure you remember the meaning of the name Moses. Okay, remember it was twofold. One is that it's Ramses and Thutmose. Okay, so the, whoops, that's not a very good highlight now, is it? Thutmose and Ramses. Okay. And the second meaning behind that name, remember, is drawn out of the water. And I would also add with all of this, don't forget, where do I have room here? We could put it here. The arc parallel. Okay, so don't forget that. All right, so I'll give you a couple more minutes to finish copying this, and then we will do the last slide. All right, and here's our next slide. If for some reason you did not finish the last slide, do not freak out. Don't start screaming at the sub. Just go on my website when the class is over, when you're doing your homework, find the video, fast forward to that slide, push pause, and you'll have the notes. It'll all be okay. All right, so going forward, we have Moses as an adult. He kills an Egyptian who is abusing an Israelite. We should add in that concept that I came up with, that this foreshadows Moses and his character foreshadows his character and mission as a liberator, which we will see going forward. Why? Because he is standing up to defend the weak and oppressed. Okay, Moses is going to run to Midian, where he is called by God. It is in Midian that he meets rule. Let's rewrite that so that you can read that. It's R-E-U-L. Okay, he's going to marry Zipporah. And putting it down here, their son is Gershom. Okay? And it is going to be that here that he is going to be called by God through the burning bush. All right, so I'll give you another minute or so to finish copying this. Tonight for homework, you're going to have assignment 26. If there's some time now, you may begin it. Again, if you missed anything, just go on my website, get the video. It's not a big deal. I hope that you have a good rest of your Monday, and I will see you all tomorrow. All right, guys, so signing off. Good luck the rest of the day, and see you then. See you tomorrow. Okay, bye.